we are who we are because of the sound we make. And if we are not in tune internally inside, then we can't expect what comes out to be in tune.
He was Tommy in Canada's Tommy. He was in Miss Saigon on Broadway.
He is also a phenomenal voice teacher and a super special human being.
Who are we talking to today, Nancy?
Today we're talking to Tyley Ross. My name is Nancy Magarill. I'm a singer, songwriter, composer, performer, graphic and web designer.
And I'm Peter Michael Marino, and I'm a writer, producer, creator, performer, and educator.
We are New York-based artists you may or may not have heard of.
And we are here to introduce you to other artists you may or may not have heard of.
So I want to start first by you telling everybody who you are and what you do. I'm going to steal from Pete because he's always like, what's your elevator pitch when people ask you who you are, what you do?
I don't have an elevator pitch. My concept has always been that if people want to know anything about me, either I failed by not having something out there that made them know me in the first place, or they can just go find me. As an artist, I'd rather have my art be found. So I don't have an elevator pitch.
Wait.
However, my podcast pitch is I'm a kind of a retired music theater performer, retired recording artist, song stylist. I don't know. I've never called myself that before, but maybe it describes a certain time in my life. I'm a voice coach now, and I specialize in working with people who have dysfunctional voices. And that I shouldn't say dysfunctional, but people whose voices have needed some kind of rehab.
I took that very personally, by the way.
Yeah. And but I also have a large clientele of elite singers, people on Broadway, people with recording careers. So I have a whole spectrum of clients. But I grew up doing theater for many years and had a band for many years. So
are you really retired?
Yeah, I don't audition for anything anymore. So which means that if I get something, it's accidental, and a retired person might still take something on a contract gig basis kind of thing. And partly it's also for me psychologically. I think it's easier for me just to take a couple things off my plate by saying I don't do that anymore. And if somebody comes knocking on my door and says, yes, you do, and they have a stack of money in their hand, then I might answer the door.
I just want to back up. I do not do the elevator speech. That is not what I ask people, Nancy.
I'm sorry, it's party speech.
That is what I ask when I'm coaching people on marketing and press. What's your elevator speech? And it's always terrible. What I say on this podcast is, Tyley, you're at a party tonight. A stranger comes up to you and says, what do you do? How do you get out of the conversation, or what do you say to make them happy?
Oh, no, you're not going to like this any better than my elevator pitch.
Oh, boy.
I usually tell people I'm a voice coach, and then people usually don't know what to do with that. And then it
okay,
dies.
So now what I'm getting is you really don't like going to parties. I mean, I can agree. I don't like them either.
I don't like going to parties where I have to give elevator speeches. Yeah.
And you probably go to a lot of parties where you actually don't have to give that speech, because a lot of people that you probably see probably know what you do already.
Yes, some. I mean, my wife is an attorney, and usually if I go to parties, it's with my wife for some opening event or something like that, where I'm just the very beautiful trophy husband, and I just play my part of silently fetching beverages.
And she's not just an attorney. She's an attorney for a lot of big artists and Broadway artists, a lot of recording artists, correct?
Yes, she's got the blue chip artists in the Broadway world, particularly writers and performers, directors.
Yeah, she's got a lot of shows on Broadway right now, right?
Would you say she's a famous attorney?
I would think so.
Would you say that you're famous?
No.
Why?
I tell my son, and he rolls his eyes. He's 11. I say I was once.
What did that mean?
I'm Canadian. I've been in the States for 20 years, but the notoriety that I had in Canada doesn't translate across the border. So, I had kind of a fancy couple years when I was in my mid-20s.
What did that mean?
I was hired when I was 24. Pete Townshend hired me to play Tommy in the Canadian production of Tommy, which is having a revival this year on Broadway. It's mostly the same creative team I worked with there that's doing it here. I mean, the same conductor, the same director,
same lyrics,
always the same, had to be the same lyrics. So that was, I won the equivalent of the Canadian Tony Award, or the Canadian equivalent of the Tony Award. And for 10 years, I didn't have to audition for anything. I would just get work. It just lined up easily and nicely and conveniently for me. And maybe I just never liked auditioning. So I've
Well, who
always been an
does?
artist, right? Well, actually, there's some people who get a kick out of it, and I think some people who like the affirmation of walking into a room unknown and leaving with a gig. That was never my thing. I always felt a certain level of resentment having to audition. I felt like if people knew who you were to call you in, then they should know who you are to give you the gig. But that is unrealistic. So yeah, in Canada, I had a career when I was younger, and if I'm famous for anything, it's for not knowing the famous people that I'm talking to when I'm speaking to a famous person and asking really stupid questions of them. I mean, Ralph Macchio, I ended up sitting with him, in the mid 90s when he was a huge star. And we were introduced by a common friend at a restaurant. So we're sitting together, our common friend leaves, and I start asking questions like, so what do you do? I'm an actor. Oh yeah, stage or film, TV? Yeah, I do mostly film. I'm like, oh cool. Any films that I might know? Well, I did the Karate Kid movies. And I'm like, ooh, were you the Karate Kid? And he's like, yeah, I was the Karate Kid. I'm like, oh.
Okay, so this explains why you do not offer this information when people ask you at a party. Okay, we got it.
There you go.
We have found the source of this awkward feeling.
Mm-hmm. I was backstage at an MTV thing and was sharing a dressing room with NSYNC, and I had no idea who they were. And I was asking questions of Justin Timberlake, like, "So are you guys like a band or something?" I once bowled with Salman Rushdie, and I had no idea who he was until somebody explained it to me afterwards. I'm clueless.
Let's back up.
Sure.
Tyley, how'd you wind up in this hellscape called entertainment? How did it start? What sparked you? Did you have an inspiration? Did somebody go do something and you went, I have to do that? How did you get here?
Actually, I had an interesting first experience on stage, or nearly first experience on stage. I had done some community theater in my very small town, population 900. So the competition was not fierce for those parts that I was auditioning for back then. And I did 2 small community theater things, and then and I really enjoyed them. And my dad took me to see Ian McKellen, the famous actor.
Yeah.
He was doing a one-man show called Playing Shakespeare, and it was at a large theater. I think it was like a 2,000 seat theater or something. And at the end of the show, he came back for an encore, then another encore. And then when he came back for a third encore, he didn't have anything that he could easily do. So he said, I'm going to need some help from the audience. So I need a few volunteers. And I had no impulse to get up from my seat, but my dad sort of lifted me up and shoved me down the aisle. And he said, you will never regret this. And he was right. I walked up onto the stage, and there was maybe a dozen of us, and he gave us instructions on sort of how to be a part of this little skit that he was going to play. And he said, everybody spread out around the stage. And when I say a certain word, I want everybody to die a gruesome death. And then when you hear the following, he gives another cue word, then everybody stand up and take a bow. But he said, but you, and he grabbed my hand, because I was all of 12 years old, and a very short 12 years old too. I probably was like 3'4" or something. And he said, you die right next to me. So I did, and I died next to him. And then he did some routine about checking my pulse and checking my breath. And the audience was laughing. I didn't know what was going on because my eyes were closed. I died a gruesome death. And then when he gave his cue line for us all to stand up, he grabbed my hand and he pulled me forward for a special bow with him. So I've always felt a kinship with Gandalf and
Sir Ian McKellen.
Sir Ian McKellen. But I just remember at that moment looking out at the theater. It's the National Arts Centre Theatre in Canada, sort of the Canadian version of the Kennedy Centre, and just seeing, this dark black void ringed with lights. And I think about that almost every time I walk on stage and I see the blackness. I have this sense memory of the thrill of the first time that I saw that. And it wasn't so much that I thought I want to be on stage. I really enjoyed acting and performing. And in Canada, when I was coming up, there were no opportunities. There wasn't really such thing as a famous Canadian person who didn't leave Canada to come to the States to become famous in the States and then return to Canada, and usually return to Canada via American media channels. So in Canada, you didn't do your craft or practice it for any reason other than love. And I've encountered the opposite here in New York, where a lot of people practice it because they're looking for fame, they're looking for an opportunity, and they're looking for a quick introduction to the industry. But for me and for so many of the people I came up with, there wasn't even a chance. I mean, it didn't even occur to you that you could have a career, let alone have any kind of notoriety or make your living or have fame or anything come from it. So
where's the part where like, so I was in a play and I liked it, or I started singing and I liked it?
I went to a high school of the arts and I studied acting there, but I spent most of my free time in the piano practice rooms, not practicing piano, just practicing singing as loud and as hard as I could. I loved singing. And again, I didn't consider myself a singer. I was kind of embarrassed. But if I developed any skill there, it was just because I guess I have a lucky throat, I'm able to sing hard and get away with it. Or I could anyway back then. So I loved that. And gradually over time, the voice program that didn't have enough tenors or male singers started pulling me out of drama class to sing duets with some of the girls, join their choir. And so I started becoming kind of a hesitant member of the voice community there. And hesitant just because I didn't feel like I had any technique, or I didn't feel like I was a good singer compared to the other singers there. I had a crack in my voice a mile wide. I couldn't sing very high. But then somewhere along the way, somebody mentioned that there was a band that was looking for a singer. So I auditioned for this band and got in. And we're initially a cover band that then started writing originals. And we became finalists a couple years later in sort of the contest called Cherchez. They had a history of sort of launching successful bands. And so I was quite excited to be a part of that thing. And then the band sort of petered out. I did a couple other kind of contests. I was a part of a couple other bands. I had a development deal with Warner Records with a duet that I had that was a not so well disguised wannabe version of Wham. But then that deal didn't turn into anything. So I was sort of between being a wannabe recording artist and a wannabe TV film guy. I was getting day player roles on some small TV shows that were recorded. I actually had a lead in a series when I was 17, kind of a 90210 Degrassi High kind of show. It also had the if it was famous for anything, and it wasn't really famous at all, but it was Sandra Oh's first TV show. So we worked together on that.
Is she Canadian?
She is.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep. Yeah. She grew up in Ottawa. Again, small community, people who just did it because they loved it, never with any thought about hitting it out of the park at all.
So at some point you're doing you're acting, and I'm assuming you studied acting at this performing arts high school. That was a thing.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of finding your voice. You're auditioning for bands. So we're kind of like out of high school. Were you thinking this is what I want to be when I grow up, and that thing is blah? Or did you just go with the wind?
In my high school graduation yearbook, you get like a little summarize where you're going. Everybody's like, I'm going to this school and I'm going to study this. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm probably going to be doing something in the arts.
Which is the answer you can now give at a party. See? See?
There you go. Yeah. I've made exactly of myself what my 17-year-old
you
self
really
thought
did.
I would do. Yeah. Yeah. Somewhere in the arts. I mean, I've managed to be kind of in a lot of places in the arts, but
you have.
But I didn't know what that was going to be, and I didn't think I would make money. I didn't think that there was any real future in it for me. But I mean, I thought that I would do it as my, what made me happy while I worked at a bookstore, or at the time I worked at a paper store. It was
so you had no dreams of being famous or anything like that?
Oh, I did. I just didn't think that there was any chance of that actually happening. So when I moved from Ottawa to Toronto, I moved with literally enough money just for my first and last month's rent. And everybody said, what are you going to do when you go there? And I said, I'm going to be in Miss Saigon, which I knew was going to be coming to Toronto. I didn't know when.
You had listened to Cast Album?
Yeah, I'd been to England and I'd seen the show there and fell in love with it. But it was my way of getting people to leave me alone and stop asking. I was answering with this ridiculous answer. I'm going to be in Miss Saigon, leave me alone. And people would say, no, really, what is you? And I said, no, really, I'm going to be in Miss Saigon. And they said, how are you going to do it? I said, I don't know, but I'm just going to be in Miss Saigon. Stop asking me. I don't know how I'm going to make that happen. But
And how long did it take?
it was 2 years later I was in Miss Saigon. Yeah.
And that was in Canada or on Broadway?
That was in Canada. And then 2 years later, I was doing it on Broadway.
Well, talk about manifesting. That is
right. Yeah.
the way
So
to do
be careful what we say.
Well, you're a pretty good manifester.
I've been manifesting a job for 2 weeks now, and I had to self-tape for it. And like I'm sort of like you. I luckily haven't had to audition for anything in like the past 5 or 6 years. And man, I have literally every single day I wake up like picturing myself doing that job.
Oh, that's nice.
But then I have to talk to my therapist about like, so am I manifesting or am I setting myself up for failure? I'm already getting depressed about getting bad news. Who do I think I am? But I deserve this at this point. And I mean, like this crazy, I talk to these other artists who do these self-tapes like 3 times a week.
Oh God.
My God.
Yeah,
like
it's crazy.
How can you be like living like I am right now for 20 projects that you're wondering about? I'm worried about one.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't worry about them. Maybe they just do so many that they let them go and they don't think about it.
When you got cast, did you tell anybody, I told you so? I mean, did that ever?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of that.
Oh, good.
Going on. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you had a little bit of.
Yeah.
Were you a bit cocky?
Oh, I was really cocky. Oh, I couldn't share space. Like me at 53 couldn't share space with me at 25. Yeah. I think that would have been a hard fit. I just would have been like, oh God, this kid. Yeah.
So how did you end up getting into the U.S.?
There was a wonderful casting agent in the 80s and 90s. His name was Vinny Liff.
Oh, the best.
Johnson Liff Casting.
So great.
He passed, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, and his ashes were strewn in Schubert Alley. He was that germane to the work of Broadway for decades. Actually, here's an interesting story. Let me back up. When I was 22, I'd done a little bit of TV, a couple commercials. I was managing to almost pay my way just with sort of day player TV stuff. In order to make that believable, you have to imagine a beautiful head of curly hair and a strong jaw and all the things that were stolen from me along with my youth. There was a commercial that had a rap party. I mean, I've never heard of such a thing, a rap party for a commercial. And I didn't want to go, but my roommate, who couldn't get an agent and couldn't get a leg up in the industry, insisted that I go and take her. So we went, and they were doing karaoke, and she signed me up for karaoke. And I went up and sang, and the casting director came right up afterwards, and he said, "Who are you? And how come I haven't heard of you?" And I'm like, "No, you've auditioned me before and you cast me in this commercial, so you should know me." And he goes, "Okay, I have to see you tomorrow. You have to audition for Forever Plaid. We have to do an emergency replacement right away." And I said, "Actually, I'd auditioned for that. It went really badly. So I'm not going to come in again." And this is really the beginning of when I stopped auditioning happily and started to see that it works really well not to do that, for me anyway. He said, "Come in and sing for me tomorrow. I really think you'd be great in this role." I said, "I'm not going to come." And he said,
"Wow,
you have to come." And I said, "I'm not going to learn anything appropriate to sing. I'm going to sit at the piano and sing my own songs. And that's all I'm willing to do." And he goes, "I don't care. You come in and sing your own songs." And so I went in. These are back in the days when, nowadays, if you're auditioning for Broadway, you do a 16 32-bar cut of a song. I sat down and I played the piano poorly and sang a song of my own devising. And I did probably a 64-bar kazoo solo in the middle. No joke. I pulled a kazoo out of my pocket and I played the kazoo.
It's a big part of the show.
There was no kazoo or piano playing in that part.
It's all about blending.
And they hired me that afternoon, and I started. This is Forever Plaid. And so I started rehearsing the next day, and I was in that show for 9 months. And then out of that, I auditioned for Miss Saigon, and Vinny Liff called me up personally. He said, "Listen, I want to hire you to understudy the lead role." And he said, "I think you should be playing the lead role, but nobody knows who you are." And I said, "But I've got a lead role right now." And he goes, "Yeah, but this is a better lead role. That's going to be as far as you ever get." And he said, "Come join Miss Saigon, understudy the role. And I think you're going to knock it out of the park. And then I think I'm going to bring you down to Broadway to play it down on Broadway."
Wow. And
it was a lot more money. So I took that. I thought he was blowing smoke, but I thought I'll just take the money and maybe I'll get on one time. But I got on maybe a dozen times. And then while I was doing that, Tommy came to town and started auditioning. And I went through that audition process and was hired for that. And then that kind of made a name for me in theater in Canada. And then Vinnie Liff came back to see Tommy, and he came backstage and he said, "That was the most thrilling performance I've ever seen." And again,
Oh.
I think you're blowing smoke. I'm sure you say that backstage everywhere. And he goes, "As soon as the show is done, I'm bringing you down to Broadway." And I said, "Thanks, Vinny." And didn't think for a second that he was telling the truth. But after that show closed, a year later, I was lying in my bed, which I did for about a week after the closing of that show because I was so tired. And my phone rang. And I literally remember the color of the telephone. I rolled off the side of my bed and I picked up the phone. "Hello." He goes, "Tyley, it's Vinnie Liff."
Oh.
"Vinny, how you doing?" "Good. I'm calling from New York City, where I want you to come down and play Chris and Miss Saigon on Broadway. What do you think?" So anyway, that was how I came down to New York with Vinny bringing me down. And I played Chris on Miss Saigon for 9 months.
Did you think that, okay, this is it. This is the one. I don't have to worry after this. I'm playing this great part in New York City on a Broadway stage, literally at the Broadway Theater. I think that's where
it was. Yeah, good memory.
Wow, yeah.
My friend Roger Sire was in that. I think.
Roger, we worked together. Yeah,
yeah. I think he went on for you. I remembered it was like one of the old days. Like Roger's going on, and all of us getting our pennies together to try to. I stood. Yeah. He was my Charlie Brown to my Snoopy. So were you like, okay, this is it. I'm going to be a New Yorker. I'm going to work on Broadway. I'm going to be famous. Everyone loves me. Here we go.
Yeah, I was.
It
It did feel at that point. At that point. No, it was. I probably said out loud, like, I'm not coming home until I get a Tony Award. I want a Tony Award, and then I'll come home. And but Miss Saigon was not a happy time for me. My voice did not behave while I was there, and my voice hit the wall, which is the catalyst for why I now work with people who have struggling voices. It's a really hard role, and it's notorious for destroying singers. So I mean, I kind of felt unstoppable. I just when I came to New York, I just felt like I could do anything. I was young still, I didn't know my limits, and they had never been shown to me. And living in New York, I had I had an apartment that was very loud. I'd never lived in a place where I couldn't sleep before, and sleep is, one of the most important pieces to being a singer. If you're not sleeping, when I was doing Tommy, I was sleeping 13 hours a night to regenerate for that, and that wasn't my regular habit. I was just exhausted and needed to. But then when I was doing Miss Saigon, I was lucky if I was getting 6 hours of cobbled together sleep. I couldn't really function very well. So by the end of that, I kind of fled New York with my tail between my legs, hating New York, never wanting to come back.
Oh.
But really the kernel, like the thorn that took a long time to get out, that was the source of that, was just that my voice became unpredictable to me, and it wasn't a voice that had been very reliable to me. My voice had always been a real friend to me, and was kind of my golden egg, my golden goose. It was the goose that laid my golden egg.
Yes.
Terrible metaphor for what I'm trying to talk about.
So bad.
Yeah. And suddenly it wasn't working for me. So
you go back to Canada.
Yep.
And how are you going to make a living? What are you going to do for the rest of your life?
So I didn't really know. I didn't think that I was going to do theater anymore. Yeah. I was terrified of getting back on stage again.
Like even just as an actor in a play.
Yeah, I've never really been all that. I don't enjoy doing plays really.
Fair enough.
I love singing, and I love singing in an over the top dramatic way that music theater allows.
But it's so interesting to me because you also, I think, just from working with you, think you have really great acting instincts. So it's fascinating to me that that's not something you ever wanted to do.
Oh no, I did, and I did TV and film.
He worked with Ian McKellen. I mean,
there you go. Yeah, I should put that on my resume.
You definitely should.
Yeah. God, there's people out there who would find a way to shoehorn that into their resume. Yeah, I've lost my train of thought there. Now I'm just thinking about my resume. Let me just update that right now. Hold on a second.
What you were doing when you went back to Canada? What you thought you were going to be doing?
This is another great manifesting moment. There was a wonderful one-person performer. Her name was Sandra Seamus, and she's a huge name in Canada. sitting in her audience, you would sob crying and sob
Oh, I
laughing.
love that.
She was so great. And I remember seeing her and I thought, that's what I'd like to do. That speaks to me. I'd like to do that with music. So I took her out. It was the opening night of Beauty and the Beast in Toronto. And I had an extra ticket. So I asked Sandra Seamus if she wanted to come. I otherwise didn't know her, but I thought maybe she will come for an opening. So we saw the show, and then we went out to the party afterwards. And I said, just tell me about, like, how do you do a one-person show? How do you do it? She goes, you just do it. And I said, but how do you do it? She goes, you just stop whining and do it. And if you whine about it, you're not going to do it. And she said a couple things that I thought were amazing. She said, even if it's terrible, everyone's just going to be amazed that you did it. So just dare to do something terrible and people will be astonished.
It's true.
And we were talking maybe for about half an hour. And then a producer came up who I maybe had met once before, but didn't really remember. And he came up and he said, Tyley. And I said, yes. And he said, I didn't know you were back in town. I thought you were still on Broadway. I said, no, I'm just back. And he said, have you ever thought of doing a one-person show?
Oh,
Oh my God.
And I was like, yeah, that's actually what we're just talking about now. He said, here's my card. You call me tomorrow. I want to talk to you about doing a one-person show. And so I called him up and he said, please come to my office for lunch. So we got together for lunch and he slid a contract over to me. And it was a lucrative contract. It was basically enough money to record an album of my original material and produce a week-long run of a one-person show.
Wait, he was commissioning you to create a show?
Yeah. And so he, 6 months later, I did a one-person show. It was more a concert than a one-person show. It was, some highlights from my theater career, which at that point, I think there was 4 shows on my resume. And one of those shows was twice, or 2 of those shows was the same show. And I'd been a songwriter, which was from the days playing with my band. I'd always thought that I was a songwriter, and then sort of that I'd been frustrated along the way by accidentally ending up in music theater. So I was able to make my first record with that. And so from there, I've always sort of juggled making music as a recording artist and being a performer since then. So I'd done a lot of theater after that, but was able to sell my records in the gift store out front.
So you haven't written a musical yet for other people?
I have.
Oh, you have. Okay, because if you haven't, I was going to say we have to hang up because it's clearly time.
It's so bad that nobody will ever hear it. But it was fun. It was a pleasure to write.
You've had such a successful career as a performer. You've gotten to perform on Broadway and Canadian stages around the world. You've done the band thing where you've toured around the world, which I know I believe you either told me or I read that you don't really love touring. But it's still a dream that a lot of artists would kill to have. So it's really, and I think it's also part of maybe what makes you such a great teacher, because you share all of that experience. You care so much about actually getting to the source of the problem. So I also think that your stories of what happens in the business and the negotiations and the good and the bad is really important for people that know nothing about it, whether they're wanting to perform or they're just people who don't have an understanding of what artists really go through, in their careers, because it all sounds so great.
Well, I'll tell you that it's very hard to plan a career. And there was a line from a Sting song. He said, the universe will suck you into place. I'm sure he stole that from Nietzsche or somebody else. It's hardly original, but I like the phrasing. And I've always felt that in your career, it's kind of like you go out with 20 different kites and you throw them all up in the air and you see if the wind will pick up any of them at all. And those people that only go out with one kite with an insistence that it fly in a particular direction, regardless of the direction of the wind, are highly unlikely to meet with success. Although
it could happen.
It can totally happen. And, So here's a chunk of my life. I was doing a show. I was hired to play a show called Anything That Moves. It was a new musical written by AnnMarie Milazzo, who is an amazing novelist. She wrote an extraordinary book called Fall on Your Knees that everybody should read. And she wrote this original show that was happening in Toronto, and I was hired to play one of the leads. And my girlfriend was living in Los Angeles at the time. So I was back and forth visiting her in LA and getting ready for the show in Toronto. And then while I was in LA, at my girlfriend's pool in her little complex there, I met this older dude who was, he'd written some golden oldies hits and he'd started a publishing company, and he was interested in what I was doing, and nice enough guy. And he wanted to hear some of my songs, and he just believed in me. And so he said, listen, I'd like you to sign with my publishing company. And I thought, well, the only thing is I have to go back to Canada. I've got like 6 months. He goes, you know what? I think this is your time. I think you should sign with me. I'll pay you more than what that show is going to pay for you. And then you're writing your own thing instead of doing something you've already done a lot of. So I went back to Canada. We sorted out a contract rather quickly, and I quit that show kind of right before it started rehearsal, which everyone was fine with. You know, they were forgiving and understanding. But I went down to LA. And from the moment I got there, I realized that my relationship with my girlfriend had soured. We'd been together for years. It turned out that on the sly, she'd started dating Ryan Gosling, but I didn't find out about that till later. This is pre Ryan Gosling being hunky and cool. This is him and his
Notebook,
maybe pre Notebook. I think
Walt Disney Mickey Mouse Club.
maybe post Mickey Mouse Club. Anyway, he doesn't factor in too much into this, but
I can't believe I know so much about his career. It's terrifying.
There you go. But the day I arrive, something has gone funky with my girlfriend. My publisher calls me up and says, I need to get together with you for breakfast. So on the day that my girlfriend and I break up, I get together with my publisher, who has yet to cut me a check for signing the contract. And I get together with him, and he said, listen, I've gone bankrupt. My publishing company is I'm sorry. I'll pick up breakfast.
Oh, that's so nice.
But, you know, here I was. I'd moved to Los Angeles. I guess I had a little bit of money, but not very much. Certainly not enough just to live down in LA. I'd left my apartment in Canada. I'd come down to LA to be with my girlfriend and to do this publishing deal and live that big life there.
And you left a show behind.
And I left a show behind, which ended up winning all the awards in Canada. But that was an interesting thing, because I made my way back to Toronto after that. I was bouncing back and forth between Canada and the States quite a bit. To say that I lived in Canada was really more that I had a storage space in Canada and a lot of sublets. But I went to the award show where that show, Anything That Moves, was won. And the guy who played the role that I played won the Best Actor award for that. And it wasn't so much to me that I felt like I should have won that award, but I just thought, oh, this is in comparison to what I've just walked away from and sort of all of this promise that went sour. I just feel like I pulled the rug out from under my own feet, you know. And I said so to AnnMarie McDonald. I said, listen, I really want to apologize for messing up your show. And she said, you didn't mess up my show. Look, we just won all the awards tonight. And I was like, yeah, well, you know, things didn't work out very well for me. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry for that. I said, yeah, I don't live anywhere. I'm single now. I don't have any work. I basically canned all my work for the next year. And she said, that sounds amazing. I said, what are you talking about? She said, you can do anything right now. So what are you talking about? She said, I would give anything to be where you are. You could travel anywhere. You could move anywhere. You could do anything. You're not held down by anything. Seize this opportunity in your life.
Wow, that's so cool. And did you?
It was really cool. Yeah, I can't remember what I did immediately after that, but not long after that, I got hired to be in a film, and the director knew that I was a singer-songwriter, and he said, well, why don't you do the soundtrack to the film? Just do like an opera soundtrack, because it was sort of a spoof on the Godfather films, and I was playing the opera singer guy in the movie, and I said, well, I don't feel like making I'm not a classical singer. I don't have any interest in making a classical record. I think it would be bad. And he said, well, listen, I'll pay you whatever it is you need to make this. I really think it'd be great. And I said, well, I don't think I can do it on my own. He goes, well, let me introduce you to somebody. So he introduced me to a really brilliant arranger, Peter Kieswalter, who was living in the States. And so we made a dozen tracks that was then used for this film. That was a film that really just went straight to digital. And 2 years later, after the film, we thought, we really love this recording. Let's play one show. So we booked Joe's Pub. We printed 500 copies of this CD and prepared for the one and done concert. But for some reason at Joe's Pub that night, everybody showed up. All 4 major record companies at the time all showed up with their full signing teams. They all saw each other there. Which is better
really
than
good.
seeing you there, because they think, oh my God, there's blood in the water.
Yep.
Let's
get him now.
It was a great show. Again, we thought it was only going to be a one-time thing. Time Out New York, Billboard, Wall Street Journal, they all were there and reported on it and declared us to be the new thing. So we found ourselves in a bidding war. And again, this is just, you can't make something like that happen. It was just allowing, I took a film because it was the only thing up when nothing was going on. I begrudgingly accepted this offer to do the soundtrack to the film, which didn't really interest me, but I thought, well, I could use the money and maybe it'll be fun. And then just sort of kept on following it. It was fun. And so we just thought, well, let's play one show and then let's consider it a cocktail party gag properly revealed to New York City. And then lo and behold, we got signed to Universal Records and spent the next 10 years writing, recording, touring. Well, not so much writing, arranging, recording, and touring with that project. It was called the East Village Opera Company.
I remember when you guys started. I remember hearing so much about you.
Yeah, no, there was a lot of buzz at the time. And I guess it was, Andrea Bocelli had just come out with his first record, and Josh Groban had come out. And so record companies were looking for classical crossover acts, and they were creating them because they didn't know how to make them and they didn't know what people were looking for. And then lo and behold, here's this band that's already doing it, that already has a record that was, as far as they were concerned, kind of proven. So
what was it like touring with a project like that? Did you enjoy it?
Somewhat. I would say that most things that appear successful in my career, I enjoyed in retrospect more than I did at the time. So there were a lot of people in our band. We weren't small, but the band was, as a legal entity, was me and Peter. And his role, as we sort of, we evolved into our different roles, he was primarily arranging and musical directing. And mine was tour management and business coordinations. And we had managers, we had business managers, we had agents, we had tour managers at one point too. But what we just found is that if you want something done in a way that is going to leave some money for you to spend at the end of the day, then you have to do it yourself. And so I became the tour manager for our band. And we were, at one point, there were 17 of us out on the road. So that was me booking tickets, flights, hiring the tour bus, the bus driver, getting carnets for international travel for our gear so that it wasn't held in customs, dealing with paying people petty cash. I mean,
it's pre-internet. Was it pre-internet?
It was at the beginning of the internet.
Yeah, so it was all phone calls.
Phone calls. Yeah. It was a real full-time job. Yeah. I mean, I would spend, before a tour, I would be spending weeks before, 13-hour days coordinating, learning things like what height is our trailer and what height, I had to find out what the height of every venue's loading dock was, and, coordinating catering for our crew. And, it wasn't artistic. I was also in charge of all our merch. So I was kind of the business guy and Peter was the artsy guy. So, and then I didn't turn off being the business guy until 5 minutes before I walked on stage. And then I could be an artist for, 2 hours. And then I had to turn right back into business guy, which was never I didn't have any experience in that. But what I learned doing that was something that I had no appreciation for as an artist. Was, I even hesitate to say artist as a theatrical performer. That sounds like a real disparagement to theater artists. I was a theater artist. There we go. But I think of theater artists, I think of people creating it. I was an actor in musicals. I was really well taken care of by my agent, and it didn't concern me, what the producer had to do to make the money to make it happen, how hard it was to sell tickets night after night, and that my job was connected in any way to the financial welfare of the project, and that, how agreeable I was as a performer in their team played any role in how likely they might want to work with me again, or what kind of reputation I had. I do think that it's important for artists to be simultaneously artist and producer, and I think you're bound to be a difficult artist if you don't know what's on the other side. And simultaneously, I think you're bound to produce lousy stuff if you also aren't walking on stage to face the music for whatever it is you've produced,
Have you seen the new Tommy?
I have. Really great. And funny, when I went in, my seats were just 2 seats away from Des McAnuff, the director. Mm-hmm. And I was looking down on the same conductor who, 25 years before had been waving his baton at me. You might want to know if I thought it was great. I'm the wrong guy to ask.
No.
It was. It brought back just a flood of sense memory of
how ironic.
sense me, feel me.
Yeah.
Touch me. Yeah. Yeah. Just every moment on stage, there was a story woven
Yeah.
into it for me. So it was just a memory lane for me to sit through that show. Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't even realized, of course, that's what you're going to be doing.
Yeah.
I saw it a few weeks ago. I renamed it Tronny.
I had the same, it looked visually kind of like the dawn of computer screens. Yeah, it did. It looked very Tron-y. Yeah.
There's a Daft Punk kind of thing going on in there.
That's right. Yeah.
I think even the orchestrations, they felt a little more like tinkly, like woo. Because I saw that original more times than I should have. So I used to work at a restaurant on like when it was 1988. Restaurant on 43rd Street called Century Cafe, which was like a very popular hangout for all the theater people. Like they offered 50% off if you're in a show and you're coming during in between shows. And that's when I learned, well, people drink martinis in between playing the Phantom of the Opera. Who knew?
God.
And so we often got offered free tickets to stuff. I mean, back in the day, right? Everybody got free tickets to stuff.
Yeah.
So, I saw Tommy and it was, so visually exciting to me. And then I started just going and hanging out in front of the theater, hoping somebody would have a spare ticket. And I always got one. I mean, I was adorable and approachable and skinny. I looked like I needed help. So my friends were amazed at this. And then I would bring them along. I go, come on, watch. We'll get 2 tickets. You watch. And we always did. So I wound up calling it the Tommy game. Even though there's no game involved, it's like, you want a Tommy game tonight? Yeah, let's Tommy game. So 2 weeks ago, I was riding my bike. It was matinee day. I was riding my bike around there and I was like, oh, it's a Wednesday matinee. Maybe I could play the Tommy game. Maybe it still works 25 years, 30 years later. It does.
Oh, I'm going to do it.
Get out of here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I paid $50. I paid $50.
Okay, all right.
Tommy, the rates have changed.
Right.
But I paid $50. I was second row front mezzanine. And the guy who sold me the ticket didn't even show up. So I had a seat next to me. So I won the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not as easy to play the Tommy game when you're old.
Older.
I'll tell you a Des McAnuff story. I think Nancy's already heard this. This doesn't have to be on the podcast. And if it is, I don't care. I wrote the musical version of the movie Desperately Seeking Susan. And you can say, I never heard of it. No, you have not, because it only lasted on the West End for 2 months. It was a huge flop.
Oh, but check it out. You actually were on the West End. That's incredible.
It's pretty cool. It used all of Blondie's music.
Ooh. So
I got to work with Blondie. I commissioned them to write a new song for the show. It was a big deal. It was allegedly a big deal. I always wish it was a bigger flop, but you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't a notorious.
If it's going to be a flop, could it be something?
Yeah, like
Carrie. It needs to be Carrie.
Why didn't we cast Pink? Pink should have been in it, and then it would have been, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, so the story has it that the character of Des, played by Aidan Quinn, is based on Des McAnuff, who was dating Leora Barish, the writer of that movie at that time. And Des, the character of Des, is what we'd call the reluctant hero, right? He's kind of a Harrison Ford. He doesn't want, he's a bit of a bummer. So I get called in for the final round of auditions for Jersey Boys. And there's Des at the desk. And I do my thing. And he says, all right, I don't know, go out in the hall and find something else to read. Okay, thanks, Mr. Des. So I go out in the hall. I pick up Joe Pesci sides, totally up my alley, right? I'm able to do voices. I finish. Goes, I don't know why you would have picked that. We're done, right? Thank you. It's like, wow, Des McAnuff's mean. So then a couple of years later, he's working on this Frank Sinatra show at Radio City Music Hall. And they have to lay down all of Frank's tracks for rehearsals. I don't know why they can't use the real ones, like the vocal, the speaking stuff. So somehow I get hired. So I spend the whole day in a recording studio with Des on the other side, completely treating me like shit.
Wow.
Like, it was the worst. I'm like, he can't possibly know that I'm the same guy that auditioned for Joe Pesci. So my musical has a little workshop in New York directed by Joe Mantello. Joe Mantello drops out because they're not paying him more money. We have to find a new director. Word gets out. Everyone suddenly, Des McAnuff wants to direct my show.
Oh, God.
Producers, Peter, Des McAnuff wants to direct your show. No. What do you mean, no? It's Des McAnuff, Tommy. But, I go, no. I know how long these musicals take to work on. I'm not getting into bed with Des McAnuff for the next 2 years, 3 years. I'm not doing it. Peter, no. I have final say on casting, directing, and design. No. So I cost Des McAnuff a job. And I have to say, if he did direct it, I think the direction would have been better than the Brit that we hired. But I still think it would have been chilly. And I was writing a musical comedy, which is why it did not work in London. It was a huge hit in Tokyo. I was big in Tokyo, Tyley.
Nice.
So there's my
Big
Des
in Japan.
McAnuff. There's my Des McAnuff story. I hardly ever get to share it. And I can share it with someone who actually got to work with him. And I'm sure was probably treated much better than I was.
He was good to me.
Nancy, you got a Des McAnuff story?
No, but I'm on the hunt for one now. So I'm going to work towards having one.
An experience with Des?
Yes, of course.
Oh, okay.
I need
You
I need to buffer. I need to be the balance between you two.
Go see Tronny.
I am going to see Tronny. Actually, Christina Seju was one of my students at NYU, and I just love her. She gave me a belt, actually, that says badass at the end of the year that we worked together. And I wear it still. I wear it in my shows, and I love her. So I have to see her in this role.
Who is she?
She plays the Acid Queen.
Oh, she's great.
Yeah. She's a phenomenal
She's great
talent.
in like 12 parts. Like, it's amazing that she didn't just say, I'm only playing the Acid Queen. I'm not playing all these ensemble parts. And then she shows up in all these other numbers, and she's so great. She's so great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing her. And I just love seeing her on stage. I think she's phenomenal.
Tyley, we loved having you on our little podcast.
Thank you so much.
You're like a new person that I can now like geek over.
I told you, I knew you would love him.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry that you've had such bad luck through your entire career and you've had to really crawl and claw your way to get what you didn't want. But this is good for people listening that like sometimes things just work out.
Right?
So thank you, Tyley, for giving us all a glimmer of hope.
And then I feel like I've completely misrepresented myself because it all just seems like a bunch of mistakes all the way along. So
that's all right. I mean, I think artists should learn that like sometimes mistakes are the best things that can happen when you're writing a show or you're performing, and sometimes you mess up. Sometimes that's better than that winds up staying in the show.
Oh, it's
right?
almost always better.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's because it's authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's inspiration, unintended inspiration.
Ooh, I like that. Mm-hmm. Happy accidents. Side note. You know what's weird?
What?
I haven't talked to Roger in 10 years. Tomorrow night, I'm going out with Roger.
Oh my God, I love it.
I was like, hey, I'm doing this podcast thing, and I just talked to Tyley, and he's like, oh my God, I love him. And I was like, we love each other. Why are we not seeing each other? He's like, let's get together. And his wife, too, who I love, too. Hey, thanks for checking us out. Links to today's guest can be found in the show notes.
Don't forget to subscribe, like us, rate us, and tell all your friends about arts and craft.